We've start of the year, right? One of the things I like to do, I guess we're supposed to do this in December, but I'm always more of a January look back at the last year kind of guy.
Give it some space to breathe.
Yeah. Everybody, but it's clearly the wrong thing to do. Everybody does it in December. Anyway, even Spotify Wrapped, you get it on like the 12th of December or something. So maybe we have to change that. Anyway, but what I like to do is look back at the year, and for Ikario, we have one whole year of personal development to look back on, where on the one hand, we kind of have the dual job of, doing the personal development ourselves, experimenting on ourselves, learning as much as possible, and also teaching it through our content and our classes and so on. And so the question is that I've put to everyone on the team is, what is the biggest lesson, the biggest takeaway of a whole year of being immersed in this? What is something that you want to share with the audience or think people can benefit from? One thing, before we get into that, one thing I quickly wanted to touch on, we had a conversation not too long ago where you said something like you've experienced it almost as certain themes, right? Where it's like since you've started working for Ikario, there was the productivity thing and then the money thing, and you kind of asked what's next. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. It wasn't apparent to me when we started that there would be those themes, but only looking back, as you said, it becomes very clear that you get a grip of something, and then once there's a bit of traction, it'll pull itself along. So productivity was the first thing that we addressed when I first met you, and we worked on it. And focus and action round 1, the first time you go through it, it was only so effective, but then having it be my job, going through it again passively a second time and even a third time, 2 years later, there's without a doubt an incredible difference in my productivity. And the awareness to keep improving that is now, it can't stop. It's just built into me. I'm constantly reassessing, rechecking, going. And that's becoming a passive movement in my life where I can now say I have enough energy, enough space, and enough awareness to start looking at a different department.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where the health is coming into it now more. Mental health is something that I took very seriously in the first part because I always felt I'm very strong mentally, but actually I had a lot of weak points. And those are definitely the biggest takeaway from last year. We'll get to that just now. But I feel like when you're learning to drive a car, everything's overwhelming. What? I have to look in the mirrors and pedals and gear lever and what? And then you become automatic at it. That's what's happening. So it's like I'm ready for another department, basically.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy and something I've tried to emphasize. But I think that's the car driving is a great analogy where this stuff just becomes automatic and it's exactly like that, because like one way to think of it is that there is a level of whatever it is that you improve in your life. It comes down to habits, so you might see someone who is super productive, or they have they're in great shape, they're very healthy, whatever, they have something that you want. And the story that we're usually told is this story about how, especially a great success comes from this massive effort and sacrifice. And in a way that's true, but in another way it's not true. Because if you look at the super successful, fit entrepreneur who has everything you want, are they really, making a massive sacrifice every day, or are they just living their life on autopilot most of the time? And their habits just are all these things that lead to these results. That's what my experience has been. Like, of course, there's essentially the startup phase is where you have to do the hard work and sacrifice. One of the things we did is we started going to the gym at 6:30 in the morning. And the first 2 or 3 weeks of that were very difficult. Nobody slept enough. Everybody was basically moping about how hard it was to get up early and go to the gym. Yeah. But now, it's no effort. There's no effort.
No,
it's just what I do every single morning. And if anything, like I spent 10 days away, and I kind of hated not being able to go to the gym in the morning, right? And so I think that that's a really important factor, is like you put enough energy into something to get the ball rolling, and eventually you can live so much, a life that's so much better without actually more effort, really, in a way.
But you have to give it that time to build that foundation, because when you try and change something else, it affects that.
Yeah.
So, for example, when we started the gym, wasn't just the challenge of waking up and going to the gym and being sore, but our productivity was worse in those 2 weeks, for sure.
That's true. Yeah, for sure.
And if we weren't on a solid foundation of productivity, then it would have definitely been like, oh, I'm bad at this, and everything falls apart.
Right.
But it didn't.
Yeah. And that's also, it would also be a huge mistake to say, right, you have to give it time. Where if you say, okay, it's been 10 days and I haven't been productive, something has to change. Right. So I'm going to not go to the gym anymore. I'm going to focus on my productivity for 10 days. And then I feel like I'm neglecting my health. Something has to change.
Yeah.
You can ping pong between 2 or 3 things forever without actually getting anywhere.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
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 Okay. Well, I think that's good. That's a good insight to get started with right away. But yeah, so back to the original question, right? From this year, looking back, what is your biggest takeaway, or what are your biggest lessons there?
When I had to kind of assess it, I always like to use the wealth, health, truth, and tribe quadrants to kind of look at those areas of my life and what have I either worked on the most, or what has had the biggest effect on me overall. And I can safely say that there's enough happening in each of those that it's more of a overview feeling. And the best word I can give to that is confidence. I feel more confident in myself. To really understand that, you almost have to unpack it, and then you end up with all this information. So it's difficult, but I think that just below confidence, it's a strength to strength of self-awareness, so that there's a barrier between me and automatic reaction. Okay. I mean, I've brought that, I would have probably said that at the start of 2021, about 2020. It's just that times 5, times 10.
So what is that exactly? So you're not as reactive anymore? Like,
yeah.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah. So if the first example is what I said earlier, it's like when you fail a habit, it's not an instant reaction to I've failed. It's an assessment, it's a work, and then you get back on it. So that's in the productivity realm. Most importantly, in this year, I worked on communication, especially in my relationships. In my main relationship, life partner, we've been through this project and the virus and everything. We've been separated for a year now, so it was really a challenge to learn how to communicate using like Zoom and that, which made it even harder. But there was also lessons within that. So what I'm getting at is that I realized how I was communicating automatically, and a lot of the baggage that I uncovered the previous year, I could see how it was now being used in my communication, like passive aggressive communication, all automatic. I was unaware of all of that. So just a bit of awareness on that has given me, again, another step forward to say I can react differently, or actually better yet, I don't have to react at all. Just stop.
And where did you learn this, or where did this transformation come from?
Books, number one. It was a big thing missing in my life, having, and not just 2 books in the year, but like book to book to book. But then more than that, also the discussion of the book, the underlying principles were not new when I read the book. We talk about this here. It's like the patterns of what ikario is are becoming very clear to me. I'm understanding it and living it more as the whole picture. It's not like this one thing. Because I've read books on different chapters across all 4 quadrants that we speak of, the life pillars, and they help each other.
Yeah.
So I can't say it's just that one thing, but that's why I have to summarize it as a confidence in my ability to have a better life.
Right. So can you can confirm or deny this idea here from your own experience now? My idea here has always been that confidence comes from competence. So it's competence first.
Mm-hmm.
If someone struggles with confidence, then sure, you can learn how to change your posture and speak more loudly and all this kind of stuff. You can do things to address confidence directly or the appearance of confidence directly. But really, if you want deep confidence, not just the appearance of confidence, you need competence. So do you feel like that's because you were saying, right, if you try to explain where the confidence comes from, is like too much. But does it have to do with that you're seeing your own abilities grow, seeing your own competence grow, and that makes you more confident?
It definitely is the practical side that gives you the aha moment. It's not the information as we know.
Right.
And just reading the books in isolation may not have been as effective as being constantly pushed to like try something. Yeah. So it's the implementation that gives you the insight. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's also a great thing to mention, because I think that, as we've talked about many times, right, I think reading books is like, it's like a cheat code for life. Read books. But I think this is an important message. Some shocking percentage of people basically don't read books and don't use this cheat code, right, to give themselves the advantage. But also to address the smaller group of people who do read books, we also have to make sure that it doesn't just become mental masturbation. And I think this is a great risk. And I think this is also, there's also a certain risk, I don't know, in intellectual circles, probably also in certain areas of academia, where it's almost like there's almost like a glorification of mental masturbation almost, right? There's all talk and no action, basically. It's the activity of theorizing about stuff in itself can be very satisfying. But if you are interested in actually improving your life, I think that's an important thing to keep an eye on, right? Are you just consuming more and more content, building up more and more knowledge without actually doing anything? I think that combination of reading, learning, and also almost forcing yourself to find ways to implement this, forcing yourself to experiment with this. I think that's an important component for sure. Yeah.
So in summary, the reason 2021 was so good is because there was a good balance of small implementation and learning in all quadrants of my life. And overall, I'm like, we talk about the floor and the ceiling principle, where my entire ability has gone up. To even I'll use the example, today's been a bit of a bad day. Probably the worst one I've had in a while, but it's like, is that true? Stop it. Like, you can leave that behind. Whereas again, it took me an hour to like come to that conclusion. So it wasn't like an immediate thought like, oh, I'm good. But it was stop, go. You're telling yourself a story here, and now you're trying to dig yourself in so that you can feel worse about it. And it's like, no, you just, and that's what I mean. I'm confident in my ability to turn this day around. And already just by committing to saying, let's do this podcast, I'm 100% better already. And it's that in every aspect, in my ability to save money. I've got savings, I've got investments now, all small, but it's there and it's moving. So it's everything's going.
And so is there anything for 2022, is there anything that you feel like is the highest priority, or something you're really eager to learn or change? Any idea on that?
Yeah, the two main chapters for this year that I'm focusing on are a continuation of this communication practice, which, like you said earlier, it's not about becoming more eloquent or more more clear about what I'm saying, because that's what I thought I needed to learn. But it's more about this emotional connection to how do I speak under what emotional condition. And I think I've got a lot more to learn and a lot more to practice there. I've still got a reading list and practice list longer than I'm going to get through, but looking forward to tackling that. And then the other one is creativity. I feel that I got very serious over the last few years, especially as like my 20s came to an end. There was this like less time for play, more hustle culture came into it.
Yeah.
And I've kind of undone that now. And I think that using boredom, using sleep cycle, all this type of like, there's a whole bunch of new tools I haven't used to the full effect yet to really build on a lot more creativity, which I know I have untapped amount in me, and I actually want to see that come out this year.
Nice.
So from my perspective, we always say, I think Shane's got the bird's eye view of everything and you're on top of everything.
I don't know why you think that.
I don't know why we think that. But yeah, in light of that, tell us the truth. How is it from your side in terms of still going on this journey of growth?
Yeah.
And what are the growth points for you in the last year?
I think for me, I mean, first of all, it's definitely always an ongoing thing, because like you mentioned earlier, it's almost like you can build a certain habit, take care of an area of life, and then you move on to the next thing. And it basically never stops. You never get to an end of things to learn or things to improve or whatever. And I think there's basically been two things in 2021 that, like, let's say the biggest takeaways for me, or the biggest things that I was working on. And one of them also has to do with essentially the cyclical nature of things, because what can happen in any area of personal development, you can make progress on something and you'll often find that you're in some kind of a cycle, so something, you have some problem. When you start working on a problem, it's often at a low point. You reach a low point, you're like, I'm fed up with this, I got to do something. You start working on it and it improves, things improve, but it's not just a straight line up forever. It only gets better, right? What is much more likely to happen is that things get better for a while, and then you'll probably slide back in some form or another. And ideally, you have kind of, a wavy line upwards of improvement, and that's what it sometimes is like. But I've also experienced that sometimes you really kind of revisit almost your starting point again, which can be very discouraging. I've talked about this in the mental health recovery series. It can be very discouraging to feel like I've done all this work, I've come so far, and it seems like I've slid all the way back. But what I've found in this case, when this has happened to me, is that usually when you watch it closely, it's not actually the same. It feels the same, but it's not actually the same. Or maybe you're revisiting the same problem, but you're not quite the same person anymore.
Yeah.
And this is something that happened to me for sure, like with my mental health. Like I've talked about in that series of videos, the depression is something that I've struggled with basically since my teens, and it's kind of come and gone in waves. And it can be very frustrating to feel like I've already gone through this quest, I've already done all this stuff to untangle myself from these mental health problems, and here I am again,
You also used the word confidence in one of the videos, and it's interesting to me because that was the word that I chose to bring today. And you say that like that was one thing that dipped back to like I'm back at the bottom. But yeah, you recovered it faster, or you recover it faster, right? Or it's not as gone as you think it is.
Yeah, and I think it's both, right?
Yeah.
It's also like, at my peak confidence, it was probably a bit much.
But it's a good place to settle back down then into normal, right?
For sure. But then, but it is sad. And I think that the reason it hurts when that happens is because with confidence is a good example, right? I come from such a bad place in life. I just had zero confidence, basically. I felt terrible about myself. and so there's all this pain, and you do all the work to get out of that, and things get better. And then even if you only slide like halfway back down, you remember that pain, and you're like, I don't want to go anywhere near that again, you know. And so I think it's also like almost an emotional overreaction, where it's almost like you basically just you remember the pain from your past, and you think, oh my God, I'm there again. No, you're actually just remembering it, you know. So, but yeah, so that was one of the things. And for sure, one of the things that was very clear is that the set of tools I have now, even just like the awareness to say, oh, I'm struggling with depression, and then the set of tools I have now that I can immediately start deploying in order to first of all work through to try and discover the root of the issue and work through those issues, but also to just give myself time and space to recover. All of that is very, very different than it was last time. So yeah, that's one sign, and that's essentially one sign of progress, and that was definitely a theme for me. I've also become, related to that, I've become more and more interested in shadow work, so in really learning more about how to dig into the parts of your psyche that you basically don't want to dig into, and I think that holds a lot of promise as well. It's something I want to explore further as well. And then on the other side, in my own learning and my own thinking about what we do, both as it applies to my own life and as it applies to what we teach, the clearest thing that I've noticed in this past year is that I'm moving away from treating the human being as an active agent and moving towards treating the system as a whole. So if you think of, I think, let's say a naive view of a human being is that you are this human being. You live inside your body. You probably live like here, like behind your eyes, more or less. Right? That's where you are, and you are in control of what you do. You make decisions such as, I'm going to reach for this cup of tea, and then it happens. It's, you're in charge. You're the boss, right? And that's you. You're basically alone in your brain, controlling your body. You're in charge of what happens. And I think it's just not true. First of all, you're not in charge of most of the things that are going on most of the time, right? So, think about breathing, for example. Until I said it just now, you were not thinking about breathing, but it was happening, right? So a lot of your body is basically just running itself for the most part, but also your mind is doing all kinds of stuff. And I think that the idea that you're in charge is just not quite right. A better way to think of it is that the thing that you think of yourself as, so this sense of me, the voice inside my head, the conscious thought, it is like the rider and the elephant, right? It's like a little rider that sits on top of, or it sits on this machine that is your entire body and nervous system. And it has some input, right? It has some input. But there's a lot of other stuff going on. And there's basically more than one of you. Okay, there's more than one of you, basically. There's different voices that come up at different times, depending on what emotional state you're in, and things like that. And so instead of thinking, okay, what you have to do is, again, the naive view is like, you have to make a decision about what you want, and then you do it, and use discipline to do it, or something like that. It's like, no. All you're doing is this one little part of you is making a suggestion. Okay, what we should do is we should get in better shape and not eat chocolate anymore. And then the rest of you is like, no. And what happens? You end up eating chocolate, right? It's like the rest of you tends to win. And so instead of thinking of it as this monolithic, you're this person who's in charge, I think it's better to think of this animal that is a human being that has this one conscious part, and that has all kinds of other parts in the brain that are also in charge of different things. And it has the nervous system that has evolved over millions of years to be good at surviving in a world that's very different from the one we find ourselves in. And there are, and the nervous system, and then you also have, the entire hormonal system and so on and so forth, right? this whole system, how do you treat this whole system and help this whole system thrive? And an example of that is something we've talked about quite a lot, environment optimization, right? So, which is a very simple, it's a very simple example of exactly that. If you tell yourself, I want to use my phone less often, or I'm eating too much chocolate, it's bad for me, I want to eat less chocolate. If your phone is in your pocket and the chocolate is on the table, then you're basically going to use your phone a lot and eat chocolate.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a bunch of stuff in between where you're going to be trying to resist it, and then you feel guilty and all that. But end result, you ate the chocolate, you used your phone a lot. If the chocolate is just not here, okay, if it's not here, if you have to, put on your coat, put on your shoes, go out, go to a shop, pay money to get the chocolate, right? It's outside of your environment. It's inconvenient to reach the chocolate, and your phone is turned off and somewhere else. End result is you're going to not eat the chocolate and not use your phone.
Yeah.
And so it's like, instead of just saying, well, it's about the decision you make, you have to make the decision to use your phone less and eat less chocolate, and it's about using your willpower. No, that's just not a good way to solve this problem. A good way to solve this problem is put it out of reach of your monkey mind, put it out of reach of the animal that you are.
Yeah.
And it's just way easier. And this is something I want to take much, much further. And I'm in the process now of learning more about the nervous system and hormones and how reward mechanisms work and so on, because I think we can take this much, much further to get to another thing we talked about previously, this kind of effortless action kind of thing, where you really have certain life goals and you can do lots and lots of stuff to just clear the path and make it as easy as possible for yourself to get there.
Yeah. It's definitely, it sounds like you're studying the rules, because there are set fixed rules about life. Gravity is a rule that, if you use that one example, it's see us as water. Water has to adhere to gravity, but this is how the canyons are formed, and this is how water always flows, to the point, the easiest way. So instead of trying to say, well, I will make this water go uphill, it's like, no, I'm going to build an aqueduct and I'm going to redirect the water this way, and I'm going to use a cup instead of my hands, and I'm going to so there's rules that just are, and our body are full of rules. Our bodies are full of rules that we just need to learn how to redirect and divert and manage those.
Exactly. And there's an elegant solution to be had. Like using your cups instead of your hands to try and contain the water. It's just go with the nature of this thing. Instead of struggling against it. So that has been the biggest change for me, which in a way has been coming slowly, right? I've been moving towards this more and more, but I think in 2021 was when the switch really flipped, and I was like, no, this is actually where I need to spend 90% of my time managing the nervous system, and 10% of the time on the conscious mind,
And the process, like I spoke earlier about the book, reading about it and then implementing it, how does that work? Is that something you've already done this year, sort of implementing that enough?
Yeah, I mean, that's for sure. In the community, we also have this whole the habit change as a user experience problem, right? That's basically what that's about.
Yeah.
And it's been a long process, right? Because it is kind of slowly unfolding through many of the books I read, and many of the experiments we've done already are all going in that direction. And basically, we have been talking about this since day one because of the environment optimization thing, right? That was, from the outset, that was a big ikario theme. And it's more about how good can we get at this? How deeply can you refine this kind of tuning of the environment, but also tuning of your habits and tuning of your responses and so on? How good can you get at that? I think we can get a lot better,
Yeah. Any goals then, specific goals for this year? That tangible?
Yeah, so regarding this, there is a specific thing but I don't want to talk about it yet, because it'll be published later. But for me, it is specific, or let's say less specifically, but there's a very specific thing that will be published this year. But less specifically, it's making sure that I spend more of my time learning and teaching. This has already gotten a lot better.
Yeah.
But I think those are two of the most important things I can do, or just make sure that I really spend time learning and teaching, not just free time in between other things, but really prioritize that this is my job, right? This is a key part of my job. I have to be learning and teaching. And that has already been, basically 2021 was already better than any year before, and hopefully that trend continues.
Yeah. And then the last question I had is, when I did ask you, like, what's next, you did speak of getting into shape and getting really healthy, not just a little bit healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't mention that as one of my main goals because it's just I almost don't want to see it as a goal this year. It's the base habit of my existence.
Yeah.
Obviously, that being said, I do the back of my mind, I want to be in really good shape, and I'm on good track for that by like mid-year.
Yeah.
But anything in that regard for you?
Yeah, I mean, the same thing. So I think that in terms of how we have gone through it with the ikario team, I do think that productivity is like one of the first things. You have to become an implementer. You have to make sure you're not wasting your time. So that's where we started. Then money was a topic towards the end of the year. Just make sure that people
get it
have
started basically, because it's going to take time.
Exactly. Just get it started, and I think it's not that difficult, right? You just get the basics down. You make it a habit. So you get that started, and then like physical health is something that is another one of those foundational things that is definitely, I think, what was it like Socrates or someone who said, what was the quote? Something, it's a shame for a man to go to his grave without seeing the strength and beauty his body is capable of, something like that, right? Yeah. And I think that, I think there's truth to that. I think if you want to be a high performance individual and you want to live the best life possible, you cannot afford to be mediocre physically. And so one of the things we're doing, yes, we're spending about an hour a day at the gym, which is a good start, but that is only a component, right? We're doing strength training, and we're doing strength training, which I think is, which people like to call functional, which I think is a bit of a dumb term, but functional strength training kind of stuff. But that's really just one component. I think it's important to build mobility and to be able to master complex movement skills, not just lift heavy weights. And that's definitely something that I want to double down on as well this year.
Skills.
Yeah.
And we're working on that one right now.
Yeah.
More about that soon. But shall we have a listen to what the other people on the team have to say about last year?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. I'm going to step out and make way for Jonas.
So, Jonas, same question to you. Like, what are the big takeaways or like main lesson from a whole year spent working on this stuff?
I think things are complex. I think that
yes.
might sound weird. Like okay, great, you've learned nothing, but I think so. The area where I found out, like the two areas where I found out that to be true, and one of them was personal, where I was like trying to figure out like patterns when it came to like motivation, mental energy, and how that related to productivity and getting shit done, and also reliability and responsibility and that stuff. And that turned out to be really complex. And the other thing, which I had basically brought from last year, was just like systems complexity when it comes to like epistemology, or we got into crypto. I got into crypto. You already know. But so I think what I think I learned from that is a bit of patience and a bit of like humility, I guess.
Yeah. So I mean, so were you surprised by the complexity of things, or what's?
I mean, I did not expect it, but also I didn't expect anything really.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is to me this sounds like a good thing, because I think that one of the a common mistake that I think people make, especially, you mentioned epistemology, which just to briefly define, right? Epistemology is about how do we know what we know? Is about truth seeking and defining truth, right? And I think this is an epistemic mistake that a lot of people make, is that, or that we're almost wired to make, is that we respond to the simple story. If someone gives you a simple explanation that you can easily remember, you're like, oh yeah, that sounds true.
Yeah.
And we're very attracted to the simple story. But often, basically, the more you look into something, the more you realize, oh, this is actually very, very complicated. And there's a quote that I actually don't know who it's from, but and I can't reproduce the quote fully, but it's about complexity or simplicity on this side or the other side of complexity, right?
Yeah.
Where the quote is something like, I don't care in the least about simplicity this side of complexity. I only care about simplicity the other side of complexity, which is to say that if someone deeply engages with a topic and they do all this learning and they churn through all this complicated noise and then they come out with a simple system, they come out, okay, well, I've developed this model that helps us make sense of this. That's valuable, right?
Yeah.
But someone who's just like, who's taken the first look at it and say, I think this is pretty simple. Look, here's a simple idea. It's like, no, you're almost certainly wrong.
I think that's it's almost a bit mean that that's the case. Because it feels like I think the reason why I was attracted to a simple story as well was that you're playing a game and you would love to know the rules,
Yeah.
Like it's in life, nobody necessarily like tells you exactly how it's going, and then I think the Dunning-Kruger effect is just like very. It's like you go up the curve and it's like you can get really seduced.
Yeah.
Until you learn about like the other side of it, and then there's all this noise omitting information and all this cognitive bias like twisting information, and then there's the simple sheer complexity of it where it's just like, well, cause and effect, second, third order effect and stuff like that, and the disaggregation between like, knowing something and then putting it into practice and discovering like this huge gap.
Yeah.
Which is like,
so. Yeah, the practice and theory gap, which is one of the reasons. I mean, with Dean, I was talking about the importance of learning things and also implementing, and that is even if you were pursuing something purely for the intellectual curiosity of it, you should still implement, because you're going to learn so much. Exactly in that gap, you think, oh, I know how this goes. And you try it out, you apply your theory, and you're like, wow, this is way more complicated.
Well, a simple example from that, when we talked about Bitcoin, right? We talked about stablecoin. And I was like, well, there's like Nexo or something like that, just like that's like one of the simplest concepts. You chuck stablecoin on there and you get like 10 or so % APY. And then you do it, and then it's like, oh, there's a gas fee. Like, and you have to sign up here, and do I need a non-custodian wallet? And like,
yeah. Stuff gets complicated, and then it's also like, interestingly, also if you look at all the stuff that is simple, that we take for granted, right? Every technological thing that we have is this incredibly complex thing. If you think about just like screens. We look at screens all the time. We're like, well, there's the picture, right? The picture is here. If I'm having a Zoom call with Jonas, here's the picture of Jonas. It looks like Jonas. What's the big deal? This is so complicated. Just making these pixels change colors in the right, frequency at the right time to create this. Just a picture is so complicated, and basically, I think everything is like that.
I think from that I got like an appreciation to, like earlier I always wanted to, in any case when I was doing something or creating something or thinking about business strategy, to like vertically integrate everything, right? Like I wanted to do everything from the bottom up and always. And I think understanding this kind of complexity is like, you don't want to be the company who offers like, I don't know, you can pay with card somewhere, right? But you also invent the screen to go with it, right?
Yeah.
It's like, no, you don't.
Yeah, and that's which is a great example, right? At this point in time, it is impossible to have a completely vertically integrated business. It's just not happening. Even if you never think about it, it's just not happening. What, you're going to invent the internet from scratch or something, right? It's like, it's just
no
not gonna
problem.
happen.
All the way up that Dunning-Kruger curve.
Yeah. So that's an interesting insight, but what do we do with that? It sounds like it's mostly bad news, right?
I mean, so the field in which I had been developing this kind of stuff was so let me back up. So in the middle of the year, I started doing like an after action report document, which was publicly available on our team Notion page, and I think that was like the first time where I had that in my when it came to like not like higher level complexity stuff where it's already so far off that you're already an armchair philosopher if you only think about it, right? But like me trying to get my shit done, that was what that was for, right? I was logging my day and I was saying, okay, what have I done? How good was the day? Why was it not good? What can I improve? And to see patterns which were recurring was actually really difficult, although they were there always. But then they came in different like shapes and facets and this kind of stuff. And just like starting to understand that they appear differently was like the first thing that helped me basically not make the same mistake twice. Because it's almost like you have to first look through the matrix in order to start to change things. And then later on, when I started to try and figure out how this whole like mental energy and motivating yourself thing really worked, that was also a thing where I was then way more comfortable with accepting that it's just like a multivariate equation with like environment and the setup of the challenge that I'm facing, as well as my own character and choice playing a role, and then being able to or allowing myself to keep all these factors around before making a conclusion. That's it, right?
I think that's an interesting point there, is that you have to, also related to what we talked about earlier, you have to give some stuff like enough time. If you start tracking all this, you're trying to make sense of how your day goes, you're trying to log as much as possible. If you give up on that a week into it, you could easily look at it a week into it and be like, well, I'm not learning anything here. This is pointless. You have to let it run longer and let these things emerge. Yeah. And that is actually, I think that's also essentially one of the instructions of dealing with complexity, is that you have to give yourself enough exposure for long enough. And, also on the topic of crypto, when I was I got back into it in 2020, right? I had kind of ignored the space for a couple of years, but I got back into it and I started learning again. And I remember distinctly like reading things or listening to podcasts where I didn't understand half of what they were saying. But that's not the right point to give up. And you just keep going, and you hear people use the same terms again and again in different contexts, and slowly it starts dawning on you how this all fits together. But it's almost like you have to submerge yourself in all this complicated stuff, and you have to stay there for a while it all just seems kind of pointless, and then eventually you start making sense of it.
It's fun because like when I started doing that with crypto as well this year, like later than you were, but got into it, I already was kind of comfortable with that because I had this experience before when it came to cameras. Right. When I learned about camera technology, basically my first exposure was like a Facebook group with just a bunch of people just writing stuff, and it was like ISO this, f-stop at that, like Teradek here and whatever, and I was like, okay, What?
Yeah.
Chinese much? So,
Yeah.
and I think just like having that having had that experience, that after half a year, I saw through that terminology was just like helpful. I think one of the biggest changes this year as well was that I changed my attitude towards the gym. So I've been trying to go to the gym for 5 years, and never really worked. I tried and restarted like 8 times at a maximum of like 4 months going there. And I can now confidently say that I think that's an environment optimization thing. That I was waking up early when no one else was, that I was the only one at the gym often, that I made myself listen to audiobooks to use the time more effective, that I had to drive through like pretty ice cold air in the morning on my bicycle for 25 minutes before getting there. And like these are the kind of things which are like, now I'm no longer surprised that I just wasn't able to keep it up.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I've had that experience too, where this is one of the reasons I kind of built a little home gym here when there were lockdowns and stuff, because I just knew from experience, if there's too much friction, as much as I like working out, if there's too much friction, I'm just not going to do it. And if all I can do is, push-ups and crunches and whatnot, I'm also not going to do it. Or I'm not going to exercise enough, right?
Yeah.
Because I've had that experience too, where, having to drive 20 minutes to get to the nearest gym, and I just end up, going with like twice a week instead of 6 times a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference.
I also want to mention that I think that, again, like adding to the conversation we just had about like multivariate equations and stuff, that I think nonetheless I had an actual measurable increase in mental fortitude, where I for 4 months basically had, without any accountability except for my AAR report, did like home workout in my shitty space in like a 3 by 3 meter or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was like the gruesome Jeff Cavalier one.
Yeah.
So then coming back to the gym, I was like doubly confident that like they're like weights and machines around, and you guys are there to keep me, to keep me on the ball, and that I was way more confident I could actually do it. And I think that played into it. So I think
Yeah.
it's like multiple.
Yeah, and that's pretty impressive. Like being able to do home workouts for 4 months in a row. That's a pretty tough challenge.
Yeah, I'm happy that I don't have to go back to that.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. I think like one last thing. This I think this upcoming year, like putting everything together. What I've learned about like the implementation gap that really stuck with me, and I think it's that I theoretically think that I know a lot, or maybe actually know a lot, who knows, but then I cannot translate it. And I think and one of the gravest direct consequences on actual real life living is like my ability to take responsibility and to be dependable. And I think that's what next year I think I want to tackle with this, is to basically be able, okay, like I have all these good intentions and all these systems and all this intellectual. So can I come to the gym every day 50 times in a row reliably?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like the bullshit test,
Yeah.
I would like to run a couple of those, and just like that would be like goals 2022. And hopefully at the end of the year, I'm a saint.
Yeah, no doubt. Abhi and Ryan, so same question to you, and let's start with you, Ryan. Biggest takeaway from 2021, a year of self-development. What are some big insights?
So this is like lessons learned. Okay, do I have to try to be brief?
I mean, try to be useful.
Yeah, on it, I'll be honest. Like I was thinking about this, and I want to say some like cool business type thing, but honestly, I think for me the biggest thing that change that I took away from this year is that kind of most of the performance, like most of the things that prevent me from performing well, have to do with like what's going on inside me, like my internal state, like any fears or negative emotions or states that I'm in or something like that. So one of the things that I really learned is to, like, if I'm really feeling some strong negative emotion, whether it be like shame or fear or something gets triggered, that rather than just trying to push through it and think like I shouldn't feel this way, I should feel good all the time, rather than doing that, to kind of accept that, okay, right now something's off, and actually go sit with that emotion and kind of like sink into it almost and kind of see what's going on. And I found that that helps me to push through things, because like
Mm.
this notion that we're always supposed to feel good, we're always supposed to be productive. We know that that's not true, but I seriously, I had that. Like I should always be on every day. And then if I wasn't, then I would just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. Meanwhile, there's this voice in my head that's saying, "What's going on? What's wrong with you? Why do you feel this way?" So it's almost like now I've learned to kind of be more self compassionate and just accept what's going on. And believe it or not, that helps me to move through those things more quickly. And because, like I said, I've noticed that a lot of times, like my performance is so dependent on my state. So being able to shift my state in that way by kind of accepting it, that's, yeah, in a very
Yeah.
long-winded way, that I think is my biggest takeaway.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I think that's a really good point. I can also, I mean, that's also something I noticed. I noticed a big shift in your attitude to this since we started working together. And yeah, like we definitely have to do like a shadow work podcast episode together where we just go fully into this. But I
Yeah,
feel like you've really transitioned into kind of embracing being more able to embrace something like, okay, whatever, I have some negative emotions going on, I'm going to sit with that, rather than like trying to almost overpower it with a positive thing, right? I feel like that's what you used to do. It's like,
yeah,
oh, I feel bad, I have to like overpower it with, with positivity or something. And I've definitely noticed a big change there in you.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, because it's almost also like the positive, trying to overcome it with the positivity just makes it worse. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's definitely the kind of thing where the more you try to push something away, the stronger it pushes back in a way, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, I think that's an awesome takeaway, and I think that, like I said, the reason I want to do a whole separate episode on this is not only because I'm also becoming more and more interested in shadow work, but also because I think there's loads of people in the self development space that that I think need to hear this. I feel like the mainstream self development idea is very much on the is let's say leaning more towards toxic positivity than towards shadow work. So I think it's a lesson that is, yeah, it's very worthwhile to talk about and hopefully reach more people with.
Mm. Yeah.
All right. Well, that was actually really brief. I don't know. I wasn't. You did a
Okay,
good job
great.
of
Yeah,
being
yeah. I
brief.
don't know how long. I don't know how long you want to make this. I don't know
Yeah.
what's the quota. So
Yeah, I don't know either. We'll see. That's Dean's problem. He's doing the edit. So so yeah. What about you, Abby? Do you have a big takeaway from the last year?
Yeah, I would say my biggest takeaway over the last year was to set personal boundaries. And from that, I learned I am responsible for my own happiness. Like that would be like the, overarching theme of the biggest thing I learned. And like something that I have struggled with quite a bit and still do to a certain degree is like the nice guy syndrome, right? And I just like over time and through experiences realized, okay, the like how you treat yourself is how you're training other people to treat you. So if
Mm,
you're consistently putting other people before yourself, the other person is only seeing that this guy is like they don't see that they need to respect your boundaries or anything like that because you're not respecting yourself. You're communicating to the world I am less important than, in this case, in this example, the other person involved, right? So the other person continues with that precedent that has been set. And like it's slightly cynical because when I, in preparation for this, I wrote it down. Like, people will push you as far as you will allow them to push you, and that's something I realized. I'm like, I used to be such, or I still struggle with being somewhat of a pushover, and nobody sees it as like, oh, this person's being nice and doing this for my benefit. It's people are more Machiavellian in general. I know it sounds very cynical, but the truth is, like, the takeaway is you are responsible for your personal happiness.
Yeah. Well, I think I do agree that that's cynical. I would just tweak that by one factor. I think some people will push you as far as you allow yourself to be pushed, right? And those people will probably find you. So if you don't have good personal boundaries, I think a lot of people are just good people, and they're not going to not necessarily going to take advantage of you. But some people will spot that from a mile away, and they will indeed take advantage. I'm interested to hear about this. I would not have guessed that you are someone who struggles with personal boundaries. And yeah, nice guy syndrome, and this is something we've talked about as well before. Obviously, it affects loads and loads of guys. Yeah, can you give us? Is there any like specific example that stands out for you where you can say, I used to, or here's a situation where I used to do this and now I do that, or something like that, to just give a bit more context?
Okay, for example, if I'm working on something and somebody asks me to do something, previously my behavior was I would stop what I'm doing and then just switch task, right? And recently what I started doing instead was I have daily trackers of habits. So I specifically wrote down, stand up for yourself, or like prioritize yourself. So in the moment, just to be more mindful of that, okay, am I self-sacrificing right now? Like, it's not that don't help other people, obviously not, like, who says that, right? But it's like, okay, I need to prioritize myself first. Yeah, it's like very abstract. I don't have like a specific example per se.
No, but
that's just repeated behavior.
The thing with tracking it as a habit is actually genius, I think. That's really, really good, because I've done, I have a similar, I've done similar things, right? Where tracking something specifically where every time I do this, I'm going to log it, can really change your behavior. Because now, whenever someone is making a request like that, that's a new consideration. Is, hold on, am I going to track this? Depending on how I answer, I'm either going to track this as an instance or not, right? And that changes your behavior. So I think that's really good. So, okay, then another question to both of you is like, how, or what's the source of this change? Where did you learn about this, or can you kind of trace it back to? Is there like an origin of this change, if you think about it? So Ryan, is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think, to be honest, one of the books that really changed my perspective this year was the John Bradshaw books, Healing the Shame That Binds You. That book completely changed my perspective. I think sometimes you just need to read something that's worded a specific way. I might have heard this before, but just hearing it in this way made a lot of sense to me, where he really says that you can't heal yourself unless you kind of go into the pain, type of thing. So I started doing that, and I had some really profound experiences where otherwise I would have avoided it or done something else or tried to change the feeling of shame or pain or whatever you'd call it. And in this circumstance, I would just start doing different things. Where, like, for example, if I was scared to post something and I felt like I wanted to kind of like hide, or if I felt criticized or something like that, instead of avoiding it and saying I shouldn't feel like this, I would actually do the opposite, and I would magnify it. So I would sit down and I would literally pay attention to that feeling and magnify that feeling, and then it would almost just drift away, and then I would feel better. So it's just a process of experimenting with that, and then realizing that this works like every time, like to the point where I do it every time now. You know what I mean? I feel funny about something, and it's just a process of what works. So
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
was,
Awesome. Yeah.
yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, in my case, it is back to the happiness thing. Like for me, I was just having a generally unhappy experience with a lot of the things that I was doing. And I took an honest look at myself. I'm like, I'm doing so many things right. Why do I still feel this way? I'm like, okay,
Mm.
first of all, it's not anybody else's fault that I feel this way. It's my responsibility, right? So that was the origination of where it came from. Instead of expecting the world to start accommodating for me, it's like, what could I do differently to change my
Yeah.
experience? So that was the source for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. In both cases, it's really about almost like turning towards your pain in a way, right? You're unhappy with something or you're experiencing negative emotions. And instead of trying to run away, you are confronting that negativity in some way. You're examining it and going, okay, what's going on here? Or you're sitting with it and so on. So I feel like that seems like the through line, right? The big takeaway here is that there's this value to be uncovered in the uncomfortable, in the painful, in the things that make you unhappy. Like if you have the courage to turn towards them, there's probably something really valuable to be uncovered there. And I can also, um, it's interesting that it really tracks with something that's been a big theme for me as well in 2021, right? With my struggles with depression and dealing with that. This is also one of the key things that I got better at doing, and that like so often when I feel like my mental health declining, when I feel like that dark cloud descending, if I ask myself, okay, why is this happening? What's the source of this? I can identify something that's very uncomfortable, it's very unpleasant that I don't want to confront. And when I do confront it, that improves my mental state. So, yeah, it seems that we somehow all discovered something similar on different paths, which is pretty interesting. I didn't know that that was the case until we just talked now. But yeah, it seems like we're onto something there that I'm sure we'll touch upon in future content as well. But yeah, that's awesome. Thank you guys for sharing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think it's like it's funny because it sounds like it's just emotional things that we're all talking about, but it affects work, right? It really does.
For
It
sure,
really
yeah.
affects the performance. If you have all these negative voices and these thoughts, and you have this self-deprecation, and you're trying to be productive,
Yeah.
tough.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, right? Because I think that's one of the ways in which we can fool ourselves into not doing this kind of thing. Is we think, oh no, but I'm not one of those, like, I'm not some emotional person. I'm all about being a high performer, right? So I'm not going to deal with this emotional stuff. Yeah, it is ultimately this is impacting your performance quite severely. That's for sure true. And
Right.
that's
And
also, I think that yeah, go ahead, Abby.
no, go ahead. I interrupted you.
Yeah, I think that I used to be too performance focused. I used to be pathologically performance focused, and I had to learn to do less of that. But overall, I very much care about my ability to make things happen in the world, and that's still essentially a filter I apply to stuff. I'm much less interested in stuff that's just like, that kind of sounds good or maybe makes me feel good for a moment. Like that's okay, fine. But what I'm really interested in is stuff that um, increases my ability to make stuff happen. And I 100% agree. Like this kind of shadow work type stuff is very firmly in that category for me.
Hmm.
Yeah, the thing I was going to add was like it of course it affects work and performance and whatnot, but it also affects almost every area of your life, right? If you're walking
Yeah.
around with these negative feelings, and I just kind of see it as like, how do I choose to treat myself? If I choose to treat myself as like if I was a Bugatti, I'm not going to ignore the check engine light. I'm going to make sure I'm in tip top condition, right? So how do you choose to view yourself?
it's just of course there's a Bugatti in this analogy. Although I thought it was a Rolls Royce. Isn't the Rolls Royce the car of your dreams?
It's true, but those Bugattis are beautiful too. It's because in research,
You got both, Shane.
it's
You
the
got
only
both.
car that has hit 475 kilometers an hour. I was like, wow.
Oh yeah,
Imagine that.
it really is that. What's that, like the only production vehicle or something?
Yeah, like Chiron or
Yeah,
something. Bugatti Chiron. It was
yeah,
crazy.
and it counts as a production vehicle because they made like 3 of them, right? Isn't that how it works?
Yeah.
Like,
You can still buy it if you want to. Things like $2 million.
but you really have to want to, yeah. You have to really want it hard. You have to dedicate your life to that mission. But anyway, yeah, no, but that's actually total off topic. But there's an interesting history there behind the Mercedes CLK something and the McLaren F1 and some other car, where there was this race, a category of race, like F1 is like a category of I don't know what it's called, where certain cars with certain specifications race there, right? And there's a category where essentially modified production vehicles race in that category. And some producers then made these absolutely over the top insane race cars and turned them into like production vehicles so that they could have more badass cars in that race. It's actually really funny. And so for that reason, they made like 5 of these Mercedes CLK cars or whatever that you theoretically could buy in a dealership at some point. Anyway, that's pretty funny. But yeah, one day, one of these days, I know that this is a big goal of yours. Like one of these days, we're going to be driving some insane set of cars through Dubai or something. That's definitely on the bucket list. But first, I think we have some more emotional processing to do.
That's the key.
Yeah. All right. Okay, with that, I think that's good. So thank you, guys.